Thank you for downloading the latest episode of Positively Trek. We could not do this podcast without the support of our Patreon supporters, including Carl Morris, Joyce Marin, and Jim Stoffel. If you'd like to support the podcast, please go to patreon.com/positivelytrek. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, shoutouts, associate producer credits, and more. Thank you so much for your support. And with that, let's get on with the show. Welcome everyone to Positively Trek on the Road. I'm Dan Gunther, one of your hosts, and with me as always is Bruce Gibson. Bruce, you're not on the road, but I gather that from your end you say I sound a little different today.
Well, yeah, you're in your hotel room. It has a little bit of an echo because I'm sure there's high ceilings in your room. And because I can relate. This is such a great joy for me because there have been times that I have been doing what you're doing right now, and that is taking my mic and my equipment on the road as I'm traveling, and I'm reporting, calling into the show from my hotel room. I'll tell you a quick story. When I don't even know what show it was, but it was something, I was maybe a guest, I think, on Trek FM on a show. Maybe it was covering Star Trek Beyond. But I remember being told that when I get to my room, check the acoustics of the room and then put a bunch of pillows around me to keep the sound condensed. And I didn't bother doing that because that was awkward, and I've never done it since.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have thought to do that. It makes sense, but, people understand. It's a podcast. Things happen. Sometimes situations aren't completely ideal. And yeah, I'm just so glad I was able to bring my recording equipment on the road. I'm traveling far and wide working, and I'm just really glad we were able to schedule out some time we could record an episode here. So you may remember a week ago or so, or a couple weeks ago, I can't remember, I said, there's some things that might be affecting the podcast coming up in the future. So that's what this is about. But luckily we're here ready to bring you another episode.
I love the dedication, Dan. You're pulling through for us.
Yeah, I hate missing deadlines and I hate skipping episodes and stuff. And the time may come where we will have to do that at some point, but this week is not that week. So very happy to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you.
Awesome. Well, we're going to have an interesting discussion today. I thought a fun topic might be Star Trek's most stirring moments, because I thought that was a really interesting way to describe. So by stirring, I think I'm going to separate from like tearjerker moments, not quite tearjerker, but like those feelings you get when you're watching Star Trek where you're like, wow, I'm filled with awe and I'm inspired. And I just, maybe I'm going to cry a little bit, but it's not tears of sadness. It's tears of like joy and awe. So we're going to talk a little bit about those moments that make us feel that. But before we get to that, we do have a little bit of news this week. And in a surprise move, and I put surprise in quote marks here because, there's those people out there that constantly try to tell us that the opposite of this is true. But ViacomCBS has extended Alex Kurtzman's contract for another 5 years as they map out the future of the Star Trek universe and its role in Paramount Plus and Star Trek in television and all that stuff. So, Bruce, when you saw this piece of news come across the internet, did you see any interesting reactions out there?
Oh, I predicted the interesting reactions, and then I saw them. As soon as I saw this news, I was like, oh boy, this isn't going to make some people happy. And as soon as I see it, I start to see all these comments of like, oh, this sucks. Oh, Star Trek is ruined. Blah, 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 blah. And I think I saw it originally in a Facebook post from Variety on their article about this. And so I felt like I should show him some love. And I just said, congratulations, Alex, because there was all this negative stuff. Now, I think, of course, we don't have true data that shows anything, but I think most people are happy with some of the, or if all, the new Star Trek stuff and are fine with Alex Kurtzman there. And it's like those who don't are very vocal about it. But I don't think that's the majority, but I don't know. It could be. I just assume it's not because they wouldn't keep Kurtzman and these shows going if they weren't popular.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think success breeds the continuation of what's going on. So, we have 5 series in production. We've seen 3 of them. 2 of them are still coming. We're looking forward to seeing those soon. And there wouldn't be, like you said, those in production continuing if they weren't popular, or if CBS Viacom didn't have faith in them, the ones that we haven't seen, for example. And as well as the rumblings of different series coming down the line. So recently, Alex Kurtzman spoke a bit about Section 31. And also, I don't know, have you seen online? I haven't really tracked back the sources of these yet, so I didn't want to include it in the news proper today, but I've been seeing some rumblings about the Starfleet Academy idea coming up again from a few sources. I don't know.
I do remember reading something somewhere that mentioned Starfleet Academy, as if he mentioned it or something I think it was in the Variety article that I read that.
Okay, yeah. I haven't really had time to kind of look through all of that, but it's interesting, and the stuff I've seen has said it's more geared towards a younger audience and that kind of thing. So, I think what Star Trek's trying to do right now is have a very broad appeal to a bunch of different demographics. And we see that certainly with Prodigy, kind of trying to get that kid market and stuff. So ViacomCBS seems pleased with what Alex Kurtzman's doing, and looks like they want to continue that relationship. And personally, speaking for myself, I'm very pleased with what I've seen from Star Trek so far. There's been some rocky bits here and there and that sort of thing, but I think overall I've really enjoyed the new Star Trek stuff, and I'm really excited to see it continue. So, another 5 years. I wonder what Star Trek will look like in 5 years.
I don't know. It could even look a lot different than it does now. You never know. The thing I want to clarify, though, is this isn't just a Star Trek thing. Alex Kurtzman is doing other projects for ViacomCBS. So, it also could be that he's just very well liked at the company. They like his other projects, and so they want him to just continue to do what he's doing with Star Trek. Sometimes, and again, I don't know the thought process, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I'm kind of addressing this as whether you like this new stuff or not. The point is that this is a business, and so maybe he's just appeasing the executives at ViacomCBS with what they want by showing them that, hey, I'm building up the Star Trek franchise. To your point, Dan, the whole I'm going after this audience with this type of show, I'm going after a different audience with this type of show. So if we get as much of a broad audience as we can in all these little sections, we're bringing up and elevating this franchise up. And I think they're responding to that in a positive manner. And the Paramount Plus subscriptions have continued to go up. So everything from a ViacomCBS corporate standpoint is seeing growth and is seeing the building of a franchise. So whether creatively you think it's good or not, on the business side, it's working.
Yeah, and success breeds success. So I think he wouldn't be rewarded if there wasn't that bottom line financial success being shown. So yeah, and I think that's reflected probably on their end in Paramount Plus subscribers and the growth of the business that way. And speaking of Paramount Plus expansion, we've got ViacomCBS partnering with Sky for Paramount Plus expansion into Europe. And included in that is Star Trek Prodigy in 2022's debut lineup there as well. So yeah, Paramount Plus is continuing to expand, not just in the U.S., but also overseas as well. So, and I think Star Trek's got to be a big part of what's fueling that push as well.
Yeah, and not all the Star Trek series are on this service in Europe or in Latin America or even in Canada or wherever. I mean, you just have to look where you live at what is included or not. So yeah, Star Trek Prodigy will be included in this in Europe, and I think also in Latin America. But, the other Star Trek series are still either on Netflix or on Amazon Prime. They're all kind of scattered about. I don't know if the long-term plan would be to have all these Star Trek series eventually on Paramount Plus internationally or not. It all depends on different contracts and, distribution contracts and things that are going on and how those play out. But talking a lot with these studios myself and my day job, there really is all this talk about just expansion everywhere of owning your own app, distributing your own content in your own environment, on your own platform, and then expanding that internationally into other countries. And, it's a bit of chess playing because there's a lot of moving parts that are involved because you have deals with other studios and other distributors, and it just gets mucky and messy and really confusing.
Absolutely. Well, the other thing that I'm kind of getting from this write-up on TrekCore.com regarding Star Trek Prodigy in particular, it's, of course, slated for debut in North America this fall, and presumably in Latin America on the Paramount Plus expansion there this fall. But it's a little unclear if our friends in Europe with this expansion will have to wait all the way until next year till they see the new show, or if it will be available on other services as well in the meantime. We're not entirely sure about that yet. The international distribution beyond what we see in this deal has yet to be announced. So hopefully we see that prior to this fall.
That makes me a little nervous.
A little bit, yeah. We're kind of seeing shades of that Lower Decks thing again, maybe.
That's what I was just thinking. The writing on the wall kind of leans that direction, and I hope for our friends that it doesn't work that way.
I hope so, for sure. But regardless, overall, this expansion seems to be really good news for ViacomCBS and Paramount Plus. It's getting into more homes, being more widely available. However, all of the news this week, we've got to be fair. We've got to report all the news of Star Trek as it comes. And all of the news this week regarding Star Trek on Paramount Plus isn't necessarily good. So, Bruce, I see you've added this to the notes, and I did see this as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening to the Star Trek movies on Paramount Plus right now?
Well, they're not there. So, oh, wait, and I got something else to tell you, too. It just reminded me. So, yeah, the movies aren't there. So what was it? Maybe just a couple months ago. It wasn't very long ago that we reported that the first 10 movies were on there. And I know Beyond was on there. And I think the only ones missing maybe were Star Trek 09 and Into Darkness. I think that was how it played out. So there were 2 missing. Well, now all those previous 10 movies are no longer on Paramount Plus right now. And the only ones on there are Into Darkness and Beyond. Just those 2. Mm-hmm. At least the last I looked the other day. For all I know, they just left today. But those other movies are going to appear on AMC Plus. So I don't know how long those are going to be on AMC Plus and if they come back to Paramount Plus. But again, as I talked earlier, there's all these distribution deals out there and they get really messy and muddy. And it's just there's all these moving parts. So these movies aren't necessarily going to be exclusive to Paramount Plus probably anytime soon. They may be doing this coming and going type of thing. I know the company I work for, we've had conversations with Paramount to dip into their library for some of our services. And I'm sure Paramount wants to use the Star Trek library as an incentive to show, hey, look at the Paramount library that you can buy into, right? So if they take that away from that library, it makes their property look a little less attractive to buyers who want to distribute their content. So anyway, I'm glad I bought the Blu-rays earlier in the year because I wanted the digital codes because I never had the movies all digitally. And then I saw them on Paramount Plus. I was like, well, I just spent money on Blu-ray for nothing. I guess I made a right decision on that.
That's been a little bit of a roller coaster of a decision over the last few months. That's interesting to kind of see how the winds of fortune have changed on that. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on this. Of course, here in Canada, I don't get Paramount Plus, or I don't see the same Paramount Plus you guys do. I'm not subscribed, but yeah, for most of our listeners, this is definitely an interesting turn of events, and hopefully, we can get all of Star Trek on their flagship streaming service, so yeah, it's unfortunate.
Well, it's not as devastating as the other thing I wanted to mention that I just remembered. So, because, most of our listeners like us, we have the movies on DVD or Blu-ray or some other service, or even if you can't get them on Paramount Plus, you can go somewhere else. Maybe you have a subscription to or a free service and watch them. So they're available elsewhere. But here's the thing that gets me, and I'm going to look it up right now. The other day I was on the treadmill and I was on Paramount Plus, And I still had like a few more minutes left on the treadmill, and I was finished watching what I was watching. And I thought, well, what can I watch for the next like 5 minutes or so? And I thought, oh, let me go to Short Treks. And I went to Short Treks, and the episodes weren't there.
Oh, you're kidding.
But okay, I'm on the app. They're there now.
Oh,
but they weren't there. So I was like, why am I not seeing it? There was just the extras, the clips, like, interviews and trailers and that sort of thing, but none of the episodes. So then after I finished on the treadmill, I went to my app on my phone, and I went there, and it was the same thing. There were no episodes. So I immediately got onto Twitter and tweeted it out, and no one really responded to that. And then I saw somebody who also tweeted the same situation a few days before me, and I contacted Paramount Plus with a direct message and explained the situation and told them they can contact me, whatever, to fix the issue, because it sounded like when they responded to the other guy that it was a technical issue. So
okay.
I just looked now, and all the episodes are there. So we're good.
That's good.
But I was worried. I was like, why would they take Short Treks off Paramount Plus? Because that was made exclusively for that service.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Like you said, it sounds like it was a technical issue, but that kind of speaks to a larger thing that, sometimes these streaming services aren't completely reliable. So, you have a Blu-ray on your shelf. If you have a Blu-ray player that works, you're pretty much guaranteed that when you sit down to watch something, it's going to be there. But yeah, that's unfortunate that happened, that, in that moment, the service really wasn't there for you for what you wanted to watch. So it's another thing we'll have to keep an eye on. When the content isn't local to where you are, you're kind of reliant on another person's technology or an off-site technology to be able to bring the stuff to you. And sometimes that can go wrong a little bit.
Yeah, and I have the Blu-ray, so I wasn't that worried if I really want to watch Short Treks. I have the Blu-ray, but to your point, I'm on the treadmill. I don't have the Blu-ray there. I don't have it set up. I'm not going to get off, pop it in just for 5 minutes left on the treadmill, right? And I'm expecting it to be as part of a service that I'm paying for that is exclusive to that service. But for a moment, I started to worry. It's like, oh my gosh, are they going to start putting, taking like Discovery off? And the first season, so they can put it on somewhere else? And would we see these things come and go? Because the movies had just left. So I started thinking, are they going to start cleaning house and things come and go all the time? But yeah, apparently it was just a technical issue.
Okay, well, that's good. And yeah, hopefully those, like, being kind of the crown jewel of what they're offering, or at least to us Star Trek fans, I guess, maybe not the rest of the world at large, but hopefully those would stay on the service and not go anywhere.
Yes, hopefully. And I want to keep them all there so I can watch them anytime I want.
Well, let's get to our discussion here a little bit and talk a little bit about what I thought of as Star Trek's most stirring moments. And I assembled a little brief list of stirring moments, and some of them are kind of sad and some of them are kind of, really happy. But for the most part, they're things that kind of make you feel some kind of deep emotion, and not necessarily like tragic or really, really sad, but just, that feeling of deep emotion when you're watching Star Trek. It's kind of hard to put into words. So hopefully some of these examples might help a little bit. So I picked from kind of across the Star Trek universe, and hopefully, Bruce, you have some thoughts on these and maybe some moments to add as well as we go through here.
I think I made a mistake. I got a little confused. Maybe this will clue you in as to why I was confused. So one of my most stirring moments is Neelix making Talaxian coleslaw. I thought you meant stirring, like making food. So all my stuff are like a bunch of Neelix things.
Leola root coleslaw?
Yeah.
I love it.
No, I have the right stuff.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll go in like rough release order, because my first one comes from the original series, and it's kind of a sad moment, but at the same time, it's one that kind of, I don't know, makes me feel a little bit proud or a little bit, I don't know. So we'll see what you think here. I chose the sacrifice of the Romulan commander in the first season TOS episode Balance of Terror. And that great line he gives to Kirk when he says, "In another reality, I might have called you friend." And he sacrifices his ship rather than be taken captive by the Federation. And yes, it's a sad moment, but at the same time, you kind of respect the decision of this Romulan commander and understand that, you know, as he says, they're creatures of duty, and he has just one last duty to perform. And there's even like a deleted scene, and there's still photos of this out there, of Kirk saluting the Romulan commander as he sacrifices himself. And that's kind of the feeling they seem to be trying to evoke with that scene.
I don't know if I've ever seen that cut scene or photo of him saluting. That's cool.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's a really grainy photograph, but you can definitely tell it's from this episode, and he's looking at the screen doing the little salute. So, you know, if that scene had made it in the episode, salutes would be canon in Star Trek, but we've never seen it in canon.
We'll have to work that in sometime. No, that's a good one. I always loved the episode Balance of Terror. It's one of my favorite TOS episodes, and I think that's a good call, because the great thing about that episode is that our villain is respected, you know, by our hero, because they not acknowledge that they're on different sides, but they also see a lot of themselves in each other, and that's a really good episode. So yeah, I like that's a good stirring moment.
So from there, is there anything else in the original series that you thought of as like a really stirring moment that you want to talk about?
I did. And I know you will help me with this better than I could do this myself. But the whole speech from Kirk about risk is our business.
Yes.
And I'm sure you have that whole thing memorized.
If I pressed myself, I could probably get it all out. But yeah, the whole risk is our business. That's what the starship is all about. That's why we're aboard her. And it goes on from there. I won't torture everybody, but yes, that is absolutely a very stirring moment. And everything in that scene, the music, you know, building to a crescendo and stuff as Kirk makes this decision and stuff. That's a really good one. Absolutely. Perfectly the feeling I was going for. Yeah.
There's another one I have in here, and I'm contemplating if this really is a stirring moment and how we're approaching it. But in some ways, it does work for me as a stirring moment, and that is the whole death of Edith Keeler. When Edith Keeler dies, I mean, it's an emotional moment, but to me, it's also a stirring moment because it's friends who find each other and friends that are preventing Kirk from changing the timeline and doing the honorable thing of risk, right? We're risking the life of this person. She needs to die to keep things the way they are. And to me, it's very much a message of Star Trek, of the Prime Directive. And when they come through the Guardian, then, you know, Kirk gives his speech, like, let's get the hell out of here. I don't know. It's not quite what we're going with stirring, but it is, for me, like something I just want to put out there.
Absolutely. No. And that's kind of a theme that's going to come up in a few of my picks for the list as well, where there's a tragic element to it. You know, there's sadness to it, but at the same time, it's also, there's a lot of dignity in that moment where, you know, Kirk has made this decision to save the future at the expense of his love and the life of Edith Keeler, obviously. And in that moment, the future is saved. So there's definitely a triumphant aspect to it in this moment of great tragedy. So yeah, absolutely. I can see how that definitely fits in there. And then right before that as well, the reunion between Kirk and Spock and McCoy.
Right.
That moment, the kind of roller coaster that episode puts you on, you have that moment of great elation, and then seconds later, that moment of tragedy. It really is, it stirs all of those feelings together, I think.
Yeah, and it just reminds me also of Mock Time, when at the end, when Spock realizes Kirk is alive. That just came to mind when you mentioned that.
That's a perfect moment as well. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I love it. Well, I'm going to move on to the Star Trek films. And the first one on my list here from there is a moment that I think a lot of Star Trek fans love. It's very extended. It goes on for a while, like a lot of things in the motion picture. And that is the Scotty flying Kirk around the Enterprise, and Kirk looking at this love of his life, this ship that he's commanded after its refit, and the long, graceful shots of the ship and the reaction shots of Kirk getting a little misty-eyed and all of that stuff. That whole scene is just, I love it. I could watch that over and over and over again. The music, the visuals, it's just the perfect scene for getting those stirred up emotions going.
I love how you're saying, oh, I could watch it over and over again. Because I do that, It's like sometimes I put that movie on just to play that scene. And then I'll watch it again, and just listen to the music. And it saddens me in some ways that we probably won't get that in a movie again. The closest we got to that was Lower Decks.
I was going to say, and they were mocking it, but at the same time, it was with love. So, yeah.
Yeah. There's a certain pace to sci-fi, action movies, fantasy movies now in theaters, and they go a lot faster. And I know a lot of people talk about the motion pictures being too slow, and I agree in a lot of ways it is too slow. But I also like that, I just like to take in the environment, feel like you're there, feel the moment, don't rush it, But to me, you really have to be a fan to really appreciate that. If you're not really that much of a fan, you'd probably be yawning going, oh my gosh, when is this going to move forward,
You kind of want to be like the characters in Monty Python in The Search for the Holy Grail. It's only a model.
Right.
But to us Star Trek fans, it's much more. So, yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Well, and to add to that, there is one more scene in the movie that I thought of, and it's at the end when V'ger evolves, and then you see the Enterprise slowly coming towards you on screen and the planet Earth behind, like it's been saved. Like that moment also gets to me.
Yeah, that's a really good one for sure. We'll find, I think, a lot of the climaxes of various movies and episodes will have those feelings in it for sure. That comes up again in this list as well. But yeah, that's a really good one as well. Absolutely. Well, I chose one also from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And the end of that movie, of course, is filled with tragedy, with the death of Spock. Spoiler alert for a movie that came out the year I was born. Just, FYI. And I didn't want to choose, of course, the death of Spock. That's not quite what I was going for. But tied to that, very shortly after that, we get a scene, a little bit of not a montage, but like a pullback from the Enterprise and the kind of flyover of the Genesis planet. And then you see Spock's photon torpedo tube soft landed on the surface, and then it pulls out into space. And you hear Leonard Nimoy as Spock give that famous monologue, "Space, the final frontier." And it goes on from there. And that moment, after having witnessed this death of a character I love and all that sort of stuff, putting aside that he comes back later and stuff, that moment just always fills me with such kind of emotion and hope, especially seeing his coffin on the surface and that kind of hint that this may not be the end sort of thing. I love that moment.
That moment really stands out for when I saw it in the theater in 82, because
I bet, yeah.
We had no idea of the next movie is called The Search for Spock, right? We thought Leonard Nimoy is done. Spock is done, So that was really that's the end of Spock. So it was really moving. Of course, now you go, well, yeah, I know he comes back. Even if you haven't seen the other movies, because you've seen, other things of his picture as an older Spock. So he must come back, right? So you're not going to get that same effect. But yeah, back then it was a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. And I kind of always wish that I'd been able to experience that exactly like that. And there's always going to be, every time I've seen that, just that knowledge that kind of impacts that a bit. But that moment still, wow, all the feels, as people say.
Yep. But it also reminds me then, which isn't on the list, but kind of put a shout out to the death of the Enterprise in the next movie. in The Search for Spock. It's a moving moment, but it really the crew standing there watching the ship go down, and it's an honor to their best friend, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, one that I didn't put on the list, but, you know, speaking through this, I kind of have to add also from The Search for Spock is Jim. Your name is Jim. And then everybody rushing up to greet Spock, who is truly at that moment returned. I think that, of course, has to be on this list as a very stirring moment.
And Spock's like, who the heck are these people?
Yeah, absolutely. But I love that moment. And it's just, you know, everyone's all smiles, except, of course, for Spock and Savick, but they're still feeling deep emotion.
I know. I still really feel like watching that right now.
I do too. That's the thing. Anytime we talk about this stuff, I'm like, oh, now I just want to, this shows how old we are, I guess. I want to pop in the VHS like I did when I was a kid and fast forward to that scene.
Oh, I got rid of my VHSs long time ago at a garage sale.
Oh, nice. I have no idea where mine would be. Probably in some box somewhere.
I remember getting the first 4 movies in a set from Sam's Club. You know, it's like a Costco, those kind of things. When I was it was right before Star Trek V came out.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I think I got something similar right before Star Trek 6 came out, but it was a five box set. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that set, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
With like the painting of the Enterprise on the side. Yep. It's kind of red and black.
Yes.
Themed. Yeah.
I love that one. And they had a CD that also came out with that same as the cover art of that Enterprise with the red in the back.
Yeah.
That had
absolutely.
Selected songs from those 5 movies.
Oh, that's cool. I never got that one.
I still have that one. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, another moment from the films, and this is from one of my favorite films, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. And this is, for me, kind of the moment that inspired this idea for this episode. And I know you feel a little differently about this moment. So this is going to be a fun little bit of a discussion. But the reveal of the Enterprise A at the end of Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, when Kirk says, "My friends, we've come home." And, you know, they pass the Excelsior. The Excelsior kind of drifts down and away, and you see the Constitution class Enterprise A hove into view as they come towards it. So to me, a very stirring moment. They've come home. This is obviously the Enterprise, obviously the ship they're going to get. I love that moment. And now I turn it over to you, who I think, if I recall correctly, has a little bit of a different stance on this scene.
I do, but you have to think about where I was at that time in my life. So when I saw this in the theaters, I was not a big Star Trek fan. I had seen every movie in the theaters as they came out. I'd seen, I don't know, a handful of the original series episodes, but I wasn't big into Star Trek, but I really liked the movies. So, you know, here we are in the 80s and the Enterprise gets destroyed in the movie before this one. And you see the Excelsior. And to me, the Excelsior looks more updated. I think it looks more cool. And when the end of the movie comes and they're like, what ship we're going to get? And Sue's like, I hope it's Excelsior. I'm like, yeah, me too. That would be so cool. They have a whole new different ship now, bigger, badder and all this. And they fly over it. I'm like, it's the freaking same ship we've had all this time. What? No. I was so disappointed. Because I didn't
Excelsior. Why in God's name would you want that bucket of bolts?
I wasn't like, in love with the Enterprise. I mean, if I saw that movie now the way I am now, I probably would be more stirred like, yes, we got that Enterprise back. You know, same type of ship. But man, back then, as a casual fan, I was just like, no, I want the big bad ship there, that Excelsior one.
Yeah, no, for sure. I get that. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to jump to the end of the Star Trek films, the original Star Trek films, and I didn't put this on the list, but I think I've got to include Kirk's final captain's log as captain of the Enterprise A as it flies off into the sun at the end of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, when he says, soon this ship and her legacy will be the... Oh man, I'm messing up the line, but it'll be under the care of a new crew, and they will continue our adventures to all the undiscovered countries, boldly going where no one has gone before. And that whole ending, and then the signatures coming up, like all of that, it's just such a great capstone on the original series era, and one that like always brings a wee tear to my eye, as Scotty might say.
That was on my list. I was going to bring that whole thing up. Yeah.
I should have let you do that. Sorry.
No, it's great. I mean, it was the 25th anniversary. Yeah, it's their last time on screen together, their last adventure. And at this point, I really was a serious Star Trek fan at this point. So I was like into Star Trek everything. That's when I was already into reading a bunch of the novels. I was engrossed now. So going to see this movie was a really big deal to me. And like you said, that last monologue and those signatures, I was just like, oh my gosh. And I kept thinking, at least we have the next generation. At least we have that. Like, it's not over. It's just over for them, you know? Mm-hmm. And who would have known at that time that we've gotten so much Star Trek since, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, at the time it was Kirk or Picard, right?
Yeah.
You know, that was it. That was the entire Star Trek universe. And even just a few years before that, even the Next Generation wasn't a thing. So, yeah, to think that there's so much now and it all came from that, that's crazy.
I used to wonder back then, like you said, Kirk and Picard, and you would see them on the cover of Time and TV Guide, or all these different magazines and such. And then I thought, well, okay, now that the original crew's done, now the Next Generation is going to carry on. But at some point, they're going to get older. Will they do another Star Trek? I mean, I guess it would be like the next generation.
That was totally what I thought at the time, too. I was like, the 25th century, of course. You know, like each one will have to go forward about a century. So, but yeah, it shows our limited imaginations and why we're not TV execs or writers.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, for the rest of this list, what I kind of did was I picked basically one scene from each series, and with cheats, because we'll get to Deep Space Nine and I picked more than one scene there. But this is kind of where I was going, was like the one that kind of popped into my head. Now, of course, I have more coming to my head as the more we talk about this, and we'll bring those up, of course. So, you know, my initial pick might seem odd. It might be like, really, that's the most, but in the moment when I was writing this list, I was like, okay, for some reason, this moment spoke to me and reminded me of these feelings. So for the Next Generation, the one I picked was the end of the episode, The Inner Light, when it's revealed what this life has been that Picard is living, this life of Kamen and his past relatives that have since passed on appear to him there and tell him about the probe and why he's experiencing this. And you kind of get the awe that like, oh, this planet died, everyone ended, and this is them preserving their legacy through Picard. And that moment for me, like, there is definite sadness to it, but at the same time, it's like the weight of this responsibility that he now has to tell this story and what he's experienced. It just, for some reason, stirs those emotions in me of like deep appreciation and awe for what he's gone through, if that makes sense.
I mean, it's one of the best episodes, right? I mean,
absolutely,
it's so great. Yeah, I totally agree with you on this one for sure. I love The Inner Light. I think about this episode quite a bit because can you imagine just living another lifetime within a few minutes and carrying that with you in your current real life for the rest of your life, as if you've had two lives?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's
wild.
That's really got to change you. You know, it's
absolutely
gotta be weird. And then you might be questioning, wait, was that me or was that Kamen? Like, did I do that? You know, it's like there's so much there. But yeah, it's definitely a stirring moment in that film at the end, or at that episode.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll turn it over to you for other moments in The Next Generation. I have a couple that popped into my head as well that I might mention if they don't come up.
Yeah, do that, because I started the list, but I didn't finish it. So I didn't really even get this far. So I'm just going off like what comes to mind as we're talking. And it was Riker at the end of the Best of Both Worlds Part 1.
Oh,
and
yeah.
knowing that there's Jean-Luc and the whole crew seeing Jean-Luc as a Borg, and what are they going to do? And Riker has to make a decision of how to handle the situation. And of course, it ends with that cliffhanger of him saying fire. And to me, that's a stirring moment because this is his mentor, this is his captain, and then this is his crew that he has to also protect. And he's got to make a decision based on protecting himself, his crew, and the Federation by killing his captain and attacking the ship that this captain's on, who may be long gone. And that was just a stirring moment for me. Of course, I had to live through the whole summer wondering what happens, but I just remember that moment was just like, I mean, that's what you got to do in Starfleet. You got to put your pants on, you got to stand up, and you just got to say fire.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. That's a really good one. And definitely one of those iconic moments that really sticks with you for sure. The other one that popped into my head as we were talking has to be, I think, the end of the episode Unification Part 2, when Spock mind melds with Picard.
Yes.
And just the crossing of the generations and the idea that Spock and Sarek never mind melded, but now he finally gets to share his father's thoughts and feelings through Picard. That whole moment is just beautiful. And as the episode fades to black with, executive producer coming up, and like, that's the very end of this whole two-parter. I love that. What a great note to end those episodes on.
No, that's a good one for sure. Yes. As soon as you said that, I'm like, oh, why didn't I think of that one?
See, I'm like, when I made this list, why didn't that pop into my head? That's what I'm like, like, I love the Inner Light, but man, that Unification one, like, I would have thought that would have superseded it.
Well, all I can think of is we're going to finish this episode and think of more. And in my mind right now, I'm thinking, okay, what are listeners saying right now? Like, come on, guys, you got to call out and we're going to like totally miss it.
Absolutely.
So I'll tell you a stirring moment is when in the episode Justice, when Wesley falls into the flower bed. I mean, come on.
Oh man. Yeah. Such deep feelings there. Yeah. I'm kidding.
I can't think of any right now off the top of my head. You said you have another one?
It was kind of similar to I was kind of going back and forth on which one to pick, but I think also of the episode Sarek. And again, for that generations crossing moment, I think when Sarek comes aboard the Enterprise, and it's really the first time there's been kind of a crossover between the original series and the Next Generation. And you feel like there's so much history embedded in this character and the reverence that the TNG crew holds him in. I guess would picking that whole episode as a moment, would that work? I don't know. But yeah, for me, it was just like, there's such importance in this character. And it really made me feel like, wow, this universe, these heroes that we saw in the original series, they're the like childhood heroes of the Next Generation people. And that it's kind of cool, like meeting your biggest hero kind of thing.
Well, that makes me think of the first episode, Encounter at Farpoint, when we see McCoy on the ship with
That's
Data.
True, yeah.
And I remember watching that episode for the first time and seeing that. And that was kind of a stirring moment for me. At that time, I didn't care for the rest of the episode. That was my favorite part.
Yeah. Yeah, and that great line that scene ends on, well, it's a good ship, and she's got the right name. You treat her like a lady, and she'll always bring you home. It's just, it stirs emotions there. I like that.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Yeah. The other one that just came to mind is The Measure of a Man. He sits. Those scenes. With Data. And
such a great
oh my gosh.
speech. Oh my God. Yeah.
That whole speech right there. That one is a stirring moment.
Definitely. Oh, great pick. Good one. Absolutely. Well, let's move on to Deep Space Nine, and I'm breaking my rule on this list already because I have a couple already listed here. And I have to say, Nog ended up being one of my absolute favorite characters in all of Star Trek. And you see him as a kid being a thief in the very first episode, and you would not expect that to be the case. Like, oh, this annoying Ferengi brat who's a bad influence on Jake. Over the course of the series, spoiler alert for Deep Space Nine, he becomes a Starfleet cadet. He becomes an ensign. And by the end of the series, he becomes a lieutenant. And in season 7, he encounters a personal tragedy where he loses his leg in a battle. And we get an amazing follow-up episode to that called It's Only a Paper Moon. And he undergoes counseling, and he spends time with Vic Fontaine in the holosuite, I should say. And at the very end of the episode, he's in an empty holosuite trying to activate the program, and Vic appears to him. And that whole scene, which again has a lot of sadness in it. There's a lot of tragedy. He's experienced all of this loss, but there's so much hope in that scene, as well as Nog kind of takes his first step to true recovery as Vic Fontaine kind of tells him that he needs to leave the holosuite. He needs to rejoin his real life. If you spend your life in here, you'll become as hollow as I am, as he says. And it's just such an incredible, amazing scene that just never fails to bring me to tears, with sadness, but also with hope that Nog is on his way to recovery. And that scene means so much to me.
That was a big turning point for that character. And I think the Nog character is probably the character that grew the most through that series.
Mm-hmm. Which is saying something, because so many of those characters had such huge character arcs.
They did. And if he's not the most, he's definitely in the top few. I just think back to watching the first episode in the first season, and I would never think, Nog would end up being one of my favorite characters. But by the end of the series, he became one of my favorite characters. And that moment there really made him step up. He was stepping up as he became a cadet and going into becoming an officer and all these things. And this moment just proved again, just like how Nog is just going to move forward and always move forward. Nothing will set him back. And he just continues to improve and improve and improve on himself. And I just really love this character.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, also from season 7 for me, the very final episode, and this is kind of building up over the whole arc towards the end of Deep Space Nine, but another character that I absolutely fell in love with, surprisingly again, is Damar. And the way he starts out as just this minor lieutenant to Dukat, basically, into this, legate that's in charge of the war against the Federation and a villainous character, to a rebellion hero leading the rebellion against the Dominion on Cardassia, and him leading the charge for Cardassia just before he gets shot, and the rest of the troops carry on in his name in that moment. Again, a tragedy, a tragic moment. We're losing Damar, but there's that hope to continue the fight against the Dominion. I love that moment, and it's just so stirring to me.
I would have never even thought of that one, but that one's definitely a good one. That's a good one, because it's not our regular crew. It's not our heroes or whatever, and we're rooting for them,
Mm-hmm.
It's
absolutely,
that's a really good one. The only other one I can think of is one of my favorite episodes, and it's The Visitor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know it's an emotional episode, but to me, the stirring moment is towards the end when Sisko comes back for his final time to see Jake, and Jake has sacrificed himself to save his father and bring him back. And just the reaction of Ben Sisko to that, and seeing what his son has sacrificed, and he's killing himself to save him. And the father's like, he wants to see his son live on before he lives on. And he's doing the opposite of that. And then when we return to the present day of or shortly after the accident on the Defiant, Sisko has to look at his son and realize the sacrifices and the meaning of himself to his son, that his son doesn't even realize what he's done because it didn't really happen in this timeline. To me, that whole thing is just stirring about not just fathers and sons and not just about relationships, but just about, people, and the sacrifices we make for each other, or that we should at least. And I'm not saying what Jake did was right, but it just shows, how much the importance of people to one another and what they're willing to do for one another. And anyway, I just love that episode. I know you and Brandy talked about it on a recent live show, which I wasn't able to make. But that's sometimes I refer to that as my favorite Star Trek episode of all.
Yeah. And I mean, very deserving of the title as well. Incredible episode. And yeah, I never fail to get emotional watching that episode. Absolutely. And I've seen it countless times now, and it affects me every time. I'm
even emotionally affected just talking about it. Just
Absolutely.
In this brief moment.
Yeah, if you watched our live show with me and Brandy, that happened too. Absolutely.
Brandy cry? I can't imagine.
No, perish the thought. That doesn't make sense. Well, moving on to Voyager, and this was one where I wouldn't say I struggled. There's a few contenders, but for me, my pick might be a little bit of a more unorthodox one. There's a third season episode from early in the third season called The Shoot, in which Tom Paris and Harry Kim are incarcerated in an alien prison, and they have these chips that activate their aggressive tendencies, and they, people want to fight each other and all that sort of stuff. And it affects Paris quite a bit, and he kind of gets a little out of control, and the other prisoners want to kill him or try and, take him out. And Kim gets between this mob and Paris and says, "This man is my friend. Anyone who lays a hand on him has to go through me." And this is after Paris has attacked Kim because of this chip and stuff. And that moment, it was a really surprising feeling of heaviness in my chest came up, and I got a little emotional. I was like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, because, Voyager is not my favorite of the Star Trek series. I don't usually as emotionally invest in it as I have with other ones. But that moment, for whatever reason, just really got to me. And then shortly after that, when they're back on Voyager, Paris talks to Kim and he says, "I remember hearing you say, this man is my friend. And, you can't attack him before going through me." And that meant so much to me. And that acknowledgement of that deepness of that friendship just really got to me. And I loved the friendship those two have, as shown in that episode, especially.
I mean, I just love the relationship between these two. They're my favorites, so I'm glad you pointed out that episode. I haven't seen that one in a while. Again, I need to get back on track on doing my Voyager rewatch, because I watched these episodes as they came out, and I've seen several of them since, but I'm sure there's some episodes I still haven't seen since they originally aired. I just need to go through a rewatch. And this one I haven't seen in a long time, but as soon as you were talking about that, I remember this, and I really want to go. I swear to you, I am going to watch this episode. Of everything we talked about, I'm watching this episode today.
That's awesome. So the only other one from Voyager that kind of was a contender that I thought of mentioning was there's an episode called One, where the Doctor's mobile emitter fuses with some of Seven of Nine's Borg technology and creates a 29th century Borg drone who kind of ends up being a surrogate son to Seven of Nine, and his sacrifice at the end of that episode and what it means for Seven's emotional growth in that moment, when she says, "You're hurting me," and One says back to her, "You will adapt," before he sacrifices himself. Again, lots of tragedy in that moment, but also just like a weird kind of paternal pride in this son for sacrificing himself to save Voyager and stuff. Incredible moment for sure.
The one thing I want to call out, and it's not a particular scene, but it's several scenes. And what always stirs me about Voyager is the conversations that Janeway would have with Chakotay or with Tuvok in her ready room, where she has to make a decision and she is alone. I mean, she's got the weight of out of all the captains we've seen, maybe except for Captain Burnham now, but out of all the characters we've seen, she, I feel, has more weight on her shoulder about her crew than the other captains, and the fact that they are isolated out in the middle of nowhere with no one else. They have no one else to rely on, and she's the leader, and she made a decision that had them stay out there. So there's a sense of guilt that she has in, was that maybe the right decision? And even if she does feel it was the right decision, she has her crew out here that's away from their family and their friends, and she's trying to get them back home. But she also can't keep that distance from her crew like a typical captain would, because they only have each other and they have to be a family. So she has this line that she crosses a little, but not too much. And so she's really got to find that right balance. And I feel that she probably has all this weight on her shoulder, but when Chakotay comes in or Tuvok comes into her ray room and she needs to talk about something, you can just feel that weight just like come off of her. Like, you two are the only people I can really rely on. And every time those moments happen, it's always stirring for me. It's just, you are my friends. You are the ones that are the only people I can rely on and come to and help me through this, because I'm by myself on this. And it always is stirring to me. So any of those scenes always work for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that for sure. Yeah, so much happens in that ready room. I think even back to the very first episode where Janeway says to Tuvok, I spoke to your parents. They were worried about you. And Tuvok says, that is a misapprehension. Vulcans do not worry. And Janeway says, they miss you. And Tuvok says, as I do them. Like, there's just, deep emotion there that only a Vulcan can get across. I love that.
Yeah. Those types of scenes for sure. That's what I'm thinking of.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to pop over to the TNG films, and I kind of picked one moment from Star Trek First Contact, and that is the Vulcan First Contact, when the Vulcan ship lands, that whole scene with the Vulcans greeting Zefram Cochrane, and he shakes their hand, and that's just, in that moment, Star Trek starts, if that makes sense. Like, that's the moment that like leads to everything in Star Trek. And there's just the weight of that moment is so great. And I love that scene so much. I've seen it so many times.
And our crew is standing there watching it too, thinking that exact same thing. This is
exactly.
The moment. Yeah. So good. So good. Yeah. And then the only thing I would add then is Nemesis of Data's sacrifice to save Picard. Why am I going through all these sacrifices and things? But anyway, but even just before that, just knowing that, Data is willing to jump out of the ship and float through space to get over to the Romulan vessel and try to save Picard. And I don't know, those are just those moments too. But even at the very end with B4, and that scene with Picard, that was stirring.
Singing Blue Skies. Yeah.
That was very stirring.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, those of you out there who know my feelings about the Enterprise series finale, These Are the Voyages, might be surprised with this pick. But my pick from all of Star Trek Enterprise, and there are quite a few moments that I think of as very stirring in that series, but I wanted to pick this moment as a bit of an olive branch to that final episode. And that is the montage of Enterprises at the very end, where we hear Picard first saying space, the final frontier, and Kirk picks it up with his Enterprise and we see it fly by. And then Archer finishes the monologue with the NX-01 flying by at the end, kind of cementing its place in Star Trek and Enterprise history. I love that moment. I think it's incredible.
That was definitely on my list, and I was surprised to see it on yours.
I figured you would be.
But yeah, for all the reasons you said, I'll never forget the moment of seeing that for the first time, because it did feel like we were at the end of Star Trek for now. I knew at some point it would come back, but all those years of new Star Trek and it was ending, and to see that montage of, here are those 3 Enterprises with those 3 captains at the end, that was cool. I liked that.
Yeah. Definitely. Is there any others from Enterprise that you wanted to bring up?
So for others on Enterprise, the only thing that's coming to mind, again, I didn't work through the list. I'm thinking quick in my head, but the stuff with T'Pol and Archer, where Archer doesn't remember things. It's in the future.
Oh, yes. Twilight.
Twilight. Yes. That episode was very stirring for me.
Yeah, that's a good one for sure. Yeah. The sacrifice that T'Pol has made with her life to, care for Archer and stuff. That's a good one. Definitely. I also wanted to quickly mention the alliance between the Vulcans, the Andorians, the Tellarites, and the humans in the 3-parter with the Romulan drone ship, where all the ships come together in that fleet to kind of coordinate. And this is kind of like the first step towards the coalition, towards the United Federation of Planets eventually. Yeah. I love that moment. And you see, I think it's Shran and the Tellarite Grawl or somebody shaking hands, and the camera pulls out of the window and shows all the ships flying in formation together. I love that moment.
Yes, that's great. See, I'm trying to think. There's got to be something really good that we've forgotten. Everybody's yelling at us right now.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Well, let's pop over to the Kelvin timeline briefly, because I have one from Star Trek 2009. And this is the very start of that film, which I think is one of the best done scenes in Star Trek. The sacrifice of the U.S.S. Kelvin and George Kirk to save his wife and the rest of the crew and his son, who's currently being born. That whole bit where he's sacrificing himself for his son's future. And like I say, for the future of the rest of the crew as well. Incredible moment.
One of the best Star Trek scenes ever. In all of Star Trek. I'm not saying it's the best, but one of the best for sure.
Absolutely.
I have no other things to say except for that. That was definitely a stirring moment.
Yeah. What a way to kick off that movie. Like,
oh yeah.
Regardless of how you feel about the rest of the Kelvin timeline or how it went from there, that scene just so incredible.
I
Absolutely.
Love it. Yeah. Sometimes I do watch it just for that.
Yeah. And then in that same film, I just want to give an honorable mention to Spock. Again, kind of the book ending. We had him doing the monologue in Star Trek 2, and at the end of this movie, Prime Spock does the monologue as the Enterprise flies off as well. Space, the final frontier, that whole thing. We get Leonard Nimoy giving that speech again. That was an incredible moment and just always makes me really happy.
Yes, of course. Of course. If you liked it in the one, you're going to like it in the other too, right?
Absolutely.
So to add to that, I'm going to hit Into Darkness. I always find it stirring to watch Benedict Cumberbatch do his monologue about his family and his people when he's in his cell and he's tearing up. The performance of that is always stirring to me. Like Khan is just like, you can just feel the weight of the emotions and the devastation and the anger that he's carrying in him. And so I've just always loved that performance. So that's always stirring to me. And then also in Beyond, when they arrive to Yorktown Station, I love that too.
Oh, yeah. That's a great sequence. Absolutely.
Yeah, that whole sequence of them flying in and you're seeing around the station and how that looks and everything. And the Enterprise looks so small going through it. It just shows how huge this station is. I always love that scene too.
Absolutely. For sure. Well, I'm going to pop over to Star Trek Discovery now. And this is a series that's filled with a lot of those moments. It has a lot of deep emotional moments, stirring moments. But if I had to pick just one, it has to be from the first season. The episode, What's Past is Prologue, the episode where they escape from the mirror universe. And Saru finally truly takes command of the ship and gives his "we will not accept a no-win scenario" speech. And that whole scene where he says, "This ship is no longer Lorca's. It is ours. And this will be her maiden voyage." And for the first time, that crew comes together in service of good rather than evil, if that makes sense. No longer is the mirror universe Lorca in charge of this ship. It's Saru, and they're finally a Starfleet crew undertaking a Starfleet mission to escape from the mirror universe and get back to where they came from. And they finally all come together and we finally get a focus on these more minor characters. I love that moment. It's such a turning point.
That is a really good one. It's very Starfleet. It's very Star Trek, right? That's a really good scene. There's so many scenes of little speeches here and there made by like Burnham and Saru and others that I always think work really well. And that's a real good one that you just mentioned.
Well, thank you. Is there anything else from Discovery you wanted to mention?
Yeah, from the last episode, season 1, Will You Take My Hand, when we see the Enterprise for the first time, and just the new look of the redesign for the series, and just seeing the Enterprise approaching Discovery, that was a stirring moment for me.
Absolutely. And then to kind of bookend that as well, the end of season 2 for Discovery for me, when the Enterprise sets out, they receive the final signal that says that Burnham got to where she needed to go safely, and Spock analyzes the signal and Pike says, "Where shall we go, number one?" And they set out, blast off at warp, off to their own series, presumably at some point, hopefully coming soon next year. And that whole moment was really touching as well.
Yeah, and then another one that just comes to mind is Adira going to Trill to the pools.
Oh, that's a really good one, yeah.
So that scene when they're in the cavern with the pools and really discovering themselves and who they are and what does all this, and with Burnham there and I love that whole scene. Now, see, that's another episode I feel like watching today.
It's so good. Absolutely. Well, let's close out, of course, with the last 2 series we haven't touched on yet. So Star Trek Picard, for me, it has to be Data's final goodbye in the final episode of season 1 of Picard, where they're inside that, memory place and Picard's there with Data and he gets to finally say a proper goodbye. And we see that kind of featureless room and eventually he fades away as Picard finally, unplugs him basically. That whole bit, tragic and sad, of course, but also really gives me those stirring feelings because he's finally getting the closure that I feel he didn't get in Nemesis personally.
Right. So that's, the play off the stuff I mentioned in Nemesis. This is the bow on that whole present, make that really complete. And even just seeing the rest of the crew, their reaction thinking that Picard is gone, that plays around this scene, was always stirring to me too, because it wasn't even just the loss of Picard, but the fact that they've accomplished their mission. And so it's like bittersweet, and that whole ending, I really enjoy the ending of that episode. Absolutely.
That is right up there is one of the best scenes in all of Star Trek as well, personally.
Yeah. I sometimes just go to rewatch that.
Definitely. Well, believe it or not, I did pick one from Star Trek Lower Decks as well, which may not be known for its like stirring, deep emotional scenes so much, but I do have to say the final episode of season 1, where Riker and the Titan arrive to save the Cerritos from the Packlids, that whole moment, seeing that ship on screen in canon for the first time, and Riker, there's a Pakled party and I wasn't invited. That whole thing, like, it's irreverent, it's silly, it's fun, but to me still also very, very touching.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I enjoyed that very much. Titan, hey, why not? Very exciting to see that. The other stirring moment that just came to mind as you mentioned, and this is a very, very small one, but it's Tindy boarding the Cerritos for the first time. Oh,
that's a good one. Absolutely.
So it's hard to find a lot of stirring moments in Lower Decks because it's such a funny show, but there's little ones in there.
There's definitely little ones in there that show a lot of heart that these characters have. And believe it or not, I just thought of another one. And it's when it's revealed at the end of, I think it's the second episode, where Boimler has had a bad day and he doesn't feel like he belongs in Starfleet, but he ends up saving Mariner from the Ferengi. And then at the very end, it's revealed that the Ferengi is a friend of Mariner's, and that Mariner kind of just took all this abuse and being made fun of in order to help Boimler out. I love that moment. It's just, it really shows what kind of a person she is and how much she cares for her friends and stuff.
Oh, I'm so excited for season 2.
Me too. I can't wait. This week, in just 2 days after this episode comes out, we have Lower Decks season 2 dropping.
Yay, I'm so excited. Well, one final call out is Yesteryear from the animated series. I want to put something animated series in there. That whole episode to me is stirring.
Yes, absolutely. I really like that. There's so much in that episode. The realization of Spock's past, and of course the sacrifice of his pet, all of that. Very, very good pick for that, for sure.
And another one just popped to mind, not for the animated series, but in TNG, the episode Family, when Picard and his brother Robert are fighting in the vineyards and Picard breaks down. That always gets to me. It's getting to me right now, as a matter of fact. That scene just gets to me. Again, that relationship of brothers that fight but love each other, you know?
Yeah.
I love that one.
Oh, man. Okay, from that same episode as well. Worf and his parents, when Worf is talking to them about his discommendation, and his parents are saying, you know, we didn't really understand, but we want you to know we're here for you. Whatever you need, we will always love you. That whole scene. And I think it highlights the importance of not just biological families, but also adopted families. I think that's a great representation of that, and one that I really appreciated as well.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And those scenes always remind me of me and my parents.
Yeah, totally. Me too. Awesome. Well, I'm sure we missed about 1,000 stirring moments, and this is by no means a comprehensive list, but we would love to hear from our listeners. Are there any that you think are particularly egregious that we left off? Please get in contact with us. Let us know. You can contact us on the Positively Trek discussion group. You can comment on the post there. You can email us positivelytrek@gmail.com. And you can tweet to us at PositivelyTrek on Twitter. You can even find us on patreon.com/PositivelyTrek. And if you'd like to support us there, we would really appreciate that. Thank you so much, of course, to all of you who are already supporting us. We truly do appreciate everything you do for us. And Bruce, when you're not getting your emotions stirred by great, wonderful moments in Star Trek, where can we find you?
Well, you can find me watching Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, when McCoy's father's death scene happens. That's always stirring to me, too.
Yes,
that was on my list.
absolutely.
I forgot to mention that one, so that's my plug for that. But I'm on Twitter at Admiral_Rec. That's Admiral with the underline Rex. And I'm on the Star Wars Report podcast, and occasionally I've been on Literary Treks.
And when I'm not getting emotional over Garrick's breakdown in the season 2 Deep Space Nine episode, The Wire, you can find me on Twitter at Kurtrats. You can also find me on YouTube at youtube.com/Kurtrats Productions. And of course, as always, in the Positively Trek discussion group. We really want you to join that group. It's a lot of fun, and we know you'll love it. So thank you all so much for listening this week. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, as always, stay positive.